Hi, everybody. We are live on Facebook. I am John, the event coordinator at Murder by the Book, coming to you from my living room. I'm so excited for this event tonight, but I'm also so sad that we don't get to actually do it in the store. We have a real treat for you tonight, two of our favorite authors. We've got Fiona Davis with her new book, The Lions of Fifth Avenue, and Suzanne Rindell, who is the author of The Two Mrs Carlisles. So in case you were not familiar with them, Fiona Davis is the nationally best-selling author of 5 novels, including the Dollhouse, The Address, and The Lions of Fifth Avenue. She lives in New York City and is a graduate of the College of William and Mary in Virginia and the Columbia Journalism School. Suzanne Rindell is the author of The Other Typist, 3 Martini Lunch, An Eagle and Crane, and then the newest one, The Two Mrs Carlisles. She earned her PhD in literature from Rice University and currently lives in San Francisco. How are y'all doing tonight?
Great. So happy to be here. This is wonderful.
Thank you for having us.
My pleasure. I'm just going to get the Facebook pulled up so I can, if you guys have any comments or questions for either author, you can leave them in the comments on Facebook. I'll be monitoring that. So once I have a chance to chat with them, we'll be passing those along. Just get this pulled up properly. So to get started, we'll start a real easy question. Let's start with you, Fiona. Do you want to tell us a little bit about the new book?
Sorry, something popped in there, so I didn't hear. Are you asking me or Suzanne?
Yeah, Fiona. If you want to start, tell us tell us a little bit about your new book.
Yeah, sure. So my books are set in landmark New York City buildings, and this one is set at the New York Public Library in 2 time periods. In 1913, it's from the point of view of the superintendent's wife, who lives in an apartment deep inside the library with her husband and 2 kids. And this is an apartment that actually existed. And she's surrounded by all this knowledge, but she really wants something more out of life. So she applies to Columbia Journalism School, which had just opened, and gets in, and her world is really cracked wide open. And then the other time period is 1993. And that's from the point of view of a curator named Laura, who's in charge of a rare book collection. And she's about to put up a really big exhibit, and one of her rare books goes missing. And she's drawn into a series of book thefts that happened 80 years ago, as well as a terrible tragedy that happened to the superintendent's family back then. And I like to say it's about the magic of the written word and the power of women's voices.
Nice. That's a really good elevator pitch. You clearly worked on that.
I've done it a few times now.
Suzanne, you want to tell us a little bit about the Two Mrs Carlisles?
Sure. Okay, mine's a little less polished, but so basically it's about a group of girls living in a boarding house in the Barbary Coast, which was San Francisco's red light district back in the day, around 1906. And when the 1906 earthquake strikes, the girls find that the earthquake conveniently buries a dark secret for them. And in this way, the earthquake basically kind of gives them a chance to have a fresh start on their lives. And the novel's narrated by one character, Violet. So we follow Violet. She takes advantage of her fresh start by becoming a shop girl. That is, until a dashing older gentleman comes along and sweeps her off her feet. And Violet sort of always wanted to be loved, and she's completely taken with this older gentleman, and she marries him, only to learn that his first wife was a celebrated socialite who tragically died in the 1906 earthquake. And so much like Rebecca, Violet becomes obsessed with the existence of the first wife. She's also obsessed with the way her widower husband has rebuilt the house that he lived in, the mansion that he lived in with his first wife. So that is an exact replica of how it was when his first wife lived there. And Violet's obsessed with the way the servants remain loyal to their dead mistress. Essentially, I guess without like giving too much away, Violet eventually becomes suspicious that she maybe is not the only one who has a dark secret that got conveniently buried in the 1906 earthquake. And so this is from whence the mystery springs.
So we'll start with Fiona on this one too. So what draws you to historical fiction as a writer?
You know, it's such a good question. It's what I like to read. I love dual period historical fiction books. And so as a writer, I'm just drawn to these buildings that exist here in New York, like the Barbizon Hotel for Women or the Dakota Apartment House. And as I start researching, I dig up these stories or facts that happened in the past. And I just find it so illuminating to have something going on in the past and then have it resonate in modern day or, a little later, so that you really get an opportunity to compare and contrast what the building and the city was like over time. And it's just fun. I think because I was a journalist, it's fun for me to dig into all that good, meaty stuff and then try to bring it to life with fake people.
Yeah. And can I just say, I loved The Lions of Fifth Avenue. And I've loved Fiona since, I think they sent me your debut novel, The Dollhouse, the blurb, and that was the first I got to read her before your debut novel came out. What I really love most is how you tend to bookend your stories with a woman set further in the past and then one set. So, in this instance, obviously you have the teens and then you have the 1990s. And they still are these great tales of female empowerment, but female empowerment didn't always look the same during each era. So what I love is how they still have that through line that speaks to each era. And she does that so well. And I just wanted to say that was one of the things I love about your historical fiction, is that you really do put that in conversation, and it's great.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And what I love about what you do, and we both do this, but I think you do it so effectively, is create a mystery and have it slowly unfold with red herrings and clues. And when I got to the end of the Two Mrs Carlisles, I was like, I gasped out loud. It was so beautifully constructed, and that's not easy to do. So
I like creepy things. I've been a fan of Hitchcock since I was born. His birthday is one day before mine. In fact, his birthday is tomorrow. So there used to always be these great Hitchcock marathons right around the time of my birthday. I think that maybe shaped my intrigue with the sort of suspense and the red herrings and the eerie ambiance that I've seemed so drawn to.
Suzanne, so what drew you to historical fiction when you started writing?
So originally my first debut novel, I wasn't really supposed to be writing a novel. I was supposed to be writing a dissertation on 1920s literature for Rice. And I just was so immersed in that era. And again, that was an interesting era for women, in the sense that you had, the women coming out of the Victorian era into the 20s, where suddenly you have women entering the workplace as typists and whatnot. And I think that I was interested in talking about contemporary issues, but the distance of a historical lens makes it so much easier to talk about that. And the nerves that you touch, you really sort of maybe don't realize that the reader, I guess what I'm trying to say is you're touching nerves in an indirect way. And so it's a little bit more elegant way of making your political exploration, rather than hitting someone over the head with something quite opinionated. So for instance, with Three Martini Lunch, I was really interested in how everyone seemed very nostalgic for that era of the golden era of publishing, 1950s. But I wanted to sort of use that novel to point out if we go back to the 1950s, and I realized this was an era when publishing felt like we had a lot more readers. So yes, that's appealing, but you also have a lot of sexism and racism and anti-Semitism and just all kinds of things. So there's a way to talk about what's going on now through historical lens that makes it more palatable for an everyday reader who might not think they're as progressive as maybe in fact they are when these ideas come to them in this roundabout, more personalized way.
Yeah, Charlene just mentioned in the comments that Eagle and Crane was one of her favorite books, and it really helped teach her about a period in history that she just didn't know about. And I think that's one of my favorite things about historical fiction, is kind of giving you a place to kind of start as kind of a jumping off place. If something interests you, you can kind of go find more info about that.
Well, and interestingly about Eagle and Crane, when I was writing that, all the stuff with the immigration ban started happening with the Trump administration. And I remember thinking how do I make the Japanese internment feel immediate? It doesn't seem like it actually happened. It seems like we're in a post, I don't think we're in a post-racist world, but it just didn't seem like I could make it as immediate. And then everything started happening with the Trump administration when I was writing that. And I thought, well, nope, there it is. It's pretty immediate.
Yeah,
So,
it's crazy to me. And we see it a lot with kind of the guys like Daniel Silva or Brad Thor, who write these kind of big, like geopolitical thrillers, like that they always seem to have, like, not predict what happens, but like have a book come out just as things are starting to happen, like you said with that. Do either of y'all have any thoughts on why that is? Do you think it's just because as a writer, you're just observing the world more?
Well, it's like Amy Popel, right? Who's our dear friend who wrote the book Musical Chairs, that happens to be about a family almost self-quarantining as for all different reasons, not because of a virus, but just
right.
a group of a large family all congregating in the country home. And it's so prescient. There's so many lines in there where you're thinking, wow, it's as if she knew. But
well,
yeah,
also in yours, typhoid comes up in the Lions of Fifth Avenue, and the worry that this child has been to school with typhoid. I was just like, whoa, when did she write this? Because, you know, it takes a full year from when somebody usually sits down to write a book to when, you know, it actually comes out. So you had to have been writing that before this was going on. And it was so, like, you know, nail on the head sort of thing.
That's
you know,
so interesting. I forgot about that actually, because like I had written it so long ago. That's yeah. Well, let's hope there's no earthquake. Okay.
There have been a lot lately. That's something that's actually been making headlines here, that people in LA in particular are a little worried about
Right.
what that means. I'm hoping that just means that the earth is letting the pressure off and we're good.
Right.
But
Just settling.
yeah, I don't want to be that psychic, right? There's a limit.
One of the things that I love about both books, and I think one of the things that they both have in common, is they both have such a great, rich sense of place. With Fiona, not only just the library, but kind of New York itself and New York for that time period. And Suzanne, with yours, with San Francisco, both kind of before the quake and after the quake. So what kind of research do you do to establish that sense of place if you're writing about a time where you couldn't necessarily just go visit and see what it was like?
Do you want to go, Fiona?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
So with me, it was, 1913, New York City. And I started researching just what was going on then. And I found this thing called the Heterodoxy Club, which was a group of women that was founded by a feminist organizer. And they would meet every other Saturday and really debate the issues of the day, like women's rights or the right to vote, birth control, even free love, which we consider more of a 1960s thing. So they were way ahead of their time. And I think that's what helped me, is seeing that the new woman, which is what they were called, were way ahead of their time. And it was just a lot of fun to illuminate that, because we think that, oh, it was the past, so women were very happy working in the home. Well, they weren't, and they wanted more. And so for me, it's finding those real life accounts and trying to pull them out and pull them together. And with the library as a setting, I was able to go through all the superintendent's archives and look at records of, what the job was like in the 1910s and what it was probably like for the family living within the library, which was kind of cool. And those concrete details about how the kids would play baseball using books as bases until they got caught. That really, those details I could draw into the book, and then it really, I think, helps to pinpoint the time and the place and the setting.
Yeah, that was really fascinating. I had no idea there was an apartment in the public library. I mean, I knew about, like, for instance, the Campbell apartment or places like that in New York, which is the apartment inside of Grand Central. But I was really curious if you were able to use the I'm writing a book excuse to get into any, like, maybe forbidden parts of the public library. Like, did you actually try to go in some unauthorized spaces or anything?
Oh yeah, I definitely pulled out the I'm writing a book card, and they were amazing and so kind. So they gave me a behind the scenes tour of the apartment, which is now offices and storage. The family lived there for 30 years, but ever since it's been, kind of incorporated into the library. And it's up this almost like this secret stairway in this mezzanine level, and it overlooks an interior courtyard. And so that was so helpful to get a sense of it. But the coolest thing was they have something called the Allen Room, which is for authors with book contracts. And so I was able to write in there a book about the library while I was in the library. which was incredible. And the librarians, you know, would answer all my questions. They were so helpful, to the point where at one point in an early draft, there was a dead body in the book.
Oh,
And it's not like now, but
it's like in the library.
And I emailed one of the librarians. So I emailed her and I said, you know, if you had to hide a dead body in the library, where would you put it?
Oh.
And she emailed me back right away, in the basement near the carpenter's room. And it was amazing. So they went above and beyond, I have to say.
Oh no, she's thought about this before. Which coworker was it? Oh, that's
Suzanne,
awesome.
what kind of research did you do for San Francisco at that time period?
Yeah, it's interesting because I tend to do this thing where I pitch a book to my publisher, and then I go move into the neighborhood where I'm writing about. So for The Other Typist, obviously I was in New York, and for Three Martini Lunch, I even moved down to the neighborhoods of the village where that took place. And then here I had pitched this, and then we moved here maybe a few months later. So then I was in the area. The one thing is, it's great to walk around. It's great for the fact that like there are constant like tours coming through giving information. So if you're out walking your dog, you can be a little cheeky and just latch onto the tour group and ask the tour guide a bunch of questions. But what you end up finding out is really so much was just like razed during the 1906 earthquake. There is not a lot that made it through. In my neighborhood of Nob Hill, there's really just the Flood Mansion, which is now the Pacific Union Club, and the Fairmont. And so all these historical buildings really, you know, it didn't look the same. So I had to rely a lot on archival information. One great thing about San Francisco is like San Franciscans are really into their history. And it seemed like every time I was starting to like lose a little momentum, lose some steam, I would go on the San Francisco Chronicle online or the San Francisco Gate. And there would be like never before seen historical photos of San Francisco, or there would be some great anecdotal stories about a serial poisoner at the turn of the century, usually a woman, you know, and they'd be like these juicy stories, or like a bunch of like great historical ghost stories. I remember one from Golden Gate Park that was the White Lady of Golden Gate Park that was particularly interesting. So every time I actually seemed to like lose a little momentum, I found that there was a lot of archival information sort of just showing up on my doorstep, and then I would have these great new images to look through, or stories to read. There's also a few memoirs from the time, like this one came out kind of recently, Alice, Memoirs of a Barbary Coast Prostitute, and that was actually kind of an unusual artifact to have. It was anonymously written by this woman who worked as a prostitute in the Barbary Coast, but it was really insightful and detailed, and there are things like that. So yeah. And then for the fiction part, it's really the things that inspire me. I tend to make a little pile of like books and films and things that have the themes that I want to think about. And so for this, obviously, I was really into Rebecca, and I was rewatching Vertigo, and you know, things like that. So I just feed my brain all the same sort of things until something comes out of the blender.
So when you're playing with something like the Two Mrs Carlisles, like you said, kind of relies on kind of some of those kind of iconic moments in Rebecca, like the painting in the house, and just kind of even echoes of like when you first meet kind of the housekeeper, you're like, oh, there's some Miss Danvers vibes there.
Yeah.
So how do you use that kind of as an inspiration? How do you figure out how much to use that as an inspiration, and at what point do you start using it and start creating your own thing on top of it?
It's usually because I'm like, there's something missing. Like for The Other Typist, I'd been teaching The Great Gatsby, and I kept thinking like, what if Gatsby was a woman who kept refashioning herself and making up stories about herself? And then I was also thinking, what if Nick's our narrator, we completely trust everything he says, we don't believe anything Gatsby says. What if Nick was lying the whole time? And so I think that's kind of how The Other Typist, I wanted a female Gatsby and a narrator who you think you can believe, but then you realize like, why do I take that person's word as gospel? And that's how that book kind of came about. But with this one, it was, especially when I reread Rebecca for fun, I got sort of struck by the fact that when she finds out that, yes, her husband killed his first wife, she's not really worried that he's a murderer, she's like, oh, thank God he didn't like her better. You know what I mean? Like there's a sort of relief. And I thought like, wow, and why doesn't she have any, plots of her own or secrets of her own or anything? And I like that book, and I like that narrator, who by the way never has a name, but I was just sort of feeling like I wanted to maybe flip the script a little and see what happens if there was a little more agency on the female character's behalf, and what that would look like. So really just amusing with that and having a conversation with that book.
And Fiona, kind of on the opposite end, so you're writing about an apartment that was really in the New York Public Library, and I know, but you fictionalized the family. So when you're doing something kind of based on these buildings and they have backstories, how do you know at what point to stop using the actual history and what point to start kind of crafting your own world around some of those early facts?
Yeah, that's such a good question. I really start with the character. So say the character of Laura, I knew I wanted it to be from the wife of the superintendent's point of view. And, I wanted her to be trying to reach for something. And so it made sense to have her just feel like she was stifled in this library, surrounded by books and knowledge, but having no purpose. And so once I knew that, I knew I wanted to kind of make the family do what I wanted. Like I wanted the husband to be trying to work on his own novel. Yeah. I wanted the kids to play a really important part in their lives. And so so I took certain things from the real superintendent and his family, but then I need them, especially because there's a mystery element that kind of drives the story forward and has to go back and forth between two time periods. I really need the freedom to be able to make the characters do whatever I want. And so I do tend to just kind of spin off from there, to stay true to a real person's biography, which some authors do, and I am completely in awe. It doesn't give me the flexibility to throw in a really big plot twist or, surprise the reader at the end. And so having that freedom with fictional characters for me has been the way to go so far.
So I'm just scrolling through. If you guys have questions, you can leave them on Facebook. So both our coworkers, Sally and Rebecca, are both watching, and they say hi. Sally says that the 3 martini lunch was featured on Grace and Frankie. Did you know that, Suzanne?
Oh, she alerted it to me. That was a prop on the nightstand. Yeah, she took a screenshot and sent it, and I was like, oh.
And Amy Popel is watching as well. So hi, Amy.
Hi, Amy.
So Holly wants to know, Fiona, if you can discuss a little bit about how the buildings in your books are characters of their own.
Yeah, that's really important to me, is to get inside there and feel like we can show how they changed over time or how they didn't. And so for me, it's about really getting inside. And so there's certain parts of the library that I couldn't get into because they're secure. But I spent so much time wandering those halls and getting a sense of what it was like. And the buildings tend to come to life through the characters, really. The characters have to come first, so that they have to be compelling and have a goal and have obstacles in the way of that goal. And as long as that's driving the story, then the building can kind of sit back and relax and play a supporting role. But for each book, it's been completely different. From the Dakota to the Chelsea Hotel, the buildings here in New York are so different. And because I'm working in different time periods, there's always something new that surprises me from either the 30s or the 50s that I can hopefully illuminate. And it's also talking to a lot of people who've lived in the building or have written about the building or currently live in the building, because that, especially with the residences, because it's those personal stories that really inspire me. And for this one, it was learning about a librarian who wasn't at the New York Public Library, but at Columbia University's Butler Library, who had been there during a theft where a robber stole $1.8 million worth of rare books and manuscripts over the period of 3 months, and no one could figure out how it was happening. And I interviewed her about her experience, and so then I could have a book theft in my novel that feels true and compelling. And what was it like when the staff started turning on each other? Yeah. What was it like when she went before the judge and asked for a harsher sentence? And then I bring those right into the book.
And Suzanne, so buildings play a really important part of the Two Mrs Carlisles too. I mean, from the orphanage that gets the three friends together to the brothel that they end up at, which kind of changes their life, to even Carlisle's house as Violet's in it. So can you talk a little bit about kind of buildings as characters for you as well?
I think in this one, it really was just my intrigue with the sort of haunted house trope, and the way that the house actually, I felt like it played a big role in Rebecca, but you don't really notice it so much. And I guess for me, mostly, like, usually when I'm inspired by place, it's usually more the setting. So like, you know, again, teaching the Gatsby and the Great Gatsby, and like thinking about that particular version of New York and the speakeasy scene, and really wanting to sort of write something that immerses you into what it's like to be going into a blind in the middle of, like, you know, the Prohibition era. I always want to go into these like otherworldly places, and be transported. And I guess I felt like I hadn't done the house being a character yet, so I wanted to give it a go and see what that felt like.
Yeah, I mean, and I guess, you know, if you're gonna use Rebecca as sort of a jumping off inspiration, the house definitely has to be a character.
Yeah.
And haunted.
And haunted, yeah.
Yeah.
Let's see. So Fiona, has there ever been any building that you wanted to use, but as you got started, it didn't work?
You know, that has not happened yet, which I find so interesting, because this is my 5th book, so it's my 5th building. And either that means that every building in New York has some kind of story,
Yeah.
you know, which wouldn't surprise me. But yeah, so far, and that's what I've always gone for, is the surprise that, you know, at the Barbizon Hotel, there were some old time residents still living there, or the apartment inside the library, or with Grand Central, that there was an art school inside there that no one had heard of. And every building so far has surprised me. So far, no, but
have you ever wanted to do a building in a different city though? Just curious.
I would love to do London, I'll be honest.
Ooh,
I would really love to do something there. So we'll see. Maybe when the world is back to normal, I can go check it out.
And then have a research excuse.
And write it off. Yeah.
So yeah, exactly.
So speaking of kind of whenever the world gets back to normal, so how has the situation with COVID been for you guys as writers? Have you been able to actually sit down and focus? Or like, does this feel like a normal day because you're at home writing all the time anyway? Or is it just crazy? Let's start with you, Suzanne.
Such a loaded question. No, when this first happened, I was like, okay, you know, nothing's gonna change. I like to stay home and write all day and avoid the world. And, you know, I wear my pajamas all the time. You guys are amateurs. But I think really after a month or two, you realize, like, no, this is not optional. And like your ability to go out and even like the unexpected things that would sometimes spark little new parts of your stories, or you know, jags of writing or whatever, like going out and like seeing the world is how you gather all the fuel for which you then sit down and write with. So yeah, it was kind of fine in the beginning, other than the fact that it was completely horrifying, and we have a horrifying administration navigating us through this. But but I thought it was going to be okay. I think now on the you know, several months into this, yeah, I'm realizing like I really would like to go back out and garner new experiences, and, you know, whatever, just take your journal, write somewhere else, and interact with people, have those kooky stories, you know, that kind of thing. I don't know, Fiona, do you feel the same way?
Yeah, I would second everything that you're saying. And for me, you know, I'm based in the city, but just last year I bought a house just north of the city. And I'm so glad I did, because we can kind of escape up there, and been spending more time up there. But it's the same thing where if you're writing a book or editing a book and you're in your head all day, it really helps to be able to go to a play or a movie or meet friends for dinner that just shifts your mind out of that author mode and gives your brain a rest. Because otherwise, you know, I can think about characters in books nonstop, And it doesn't help. You need to take that break and be inspired by a line of dialogue in a play, or, you know, a book that you picked up at the bookstore.
Yeah.
And to
100%.
not have those experiences is tough. And, you know, Netflix just doesn't cut it.
Yeah, definitely. I find like so someone asked me recently, like, what's your process like as a writer? And I started describing it and I was like, wow, this sounds really unhealthy. But I find that there's really just two modes, at least for me, and maybe other writers are great at like checking in at 9 and checking out at 5 and parking it at the door, whatever. But I find there's the obsessive compulsive mode where you're just going for your story, and it's good to keep your head in it, because the longer you keep your head in it, the more you're actually living in that world, living with the characters. You know, you kind of like grind through some stuff that you might not push past if you don't stay in it. But then like, I find the other mode is the percolation mode, when you take a step back and you need that outside stimuli and things in order to regain your fresh eyes and get some new ideas and come back and really look at what you're doing objectively. And so what we're missing right now is the percolation mode is just like basically a walk of thinking more about your plot, the characters and their motivations, instead of being something that could spring out of nowhere and like spark something fresh, you know, give you those fresh eyes. So it's tricky, but
Right. When I go for a walk, I listen to podcasts of other authors talking about their process, which just, it's the more of the same.
Yeah.
We, my husband and I made a trip to Target last night because I needed to buy socks. It's the first time I've been to Target since like February. And I was like, oh my God, this is such a big day. I'm going to Target. I sent him a text. I was like, I need to go to Target when I get off work. Do you want to come with me? And he was so excited when he responded. And our lives are very sad right now. I'm like, yes, they are. Because at least for me, I get to go still to the bookstore every day, even though we're closed. Like I still actually get to do that. But he is here in the house, or maybe we go to the grocery store once a week, and that's it for him.
Like 2020, the year we talk about going to Target with celebration emojis.
Yeah.
That just kind of says it all. You know?
So Christine asks, for you, Fiona, have you ever considered writing about one of the theaters in New York?
You know, I kind of have in the Chelsea Girls, which is officially set at the Chelsea Hotel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There is a Broadway theater that is based on a real theater called the Freedman. In the book, it's called the Biltmore. That is a real theater that existed, and I have a playwright and an actress trying to put a show on Broadway during the McCarthy era, and that was great because I was able to get a behind the scenes tour of that theater and, you know, see what it looked like when it had fallen into complete disrepair and then had been renovated.
So you're used to the I'm writing a book card.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I pull that out all the time. And so, yeah, you know, for me being an actress, that was a joy to write because I had a bit of a shorthand into it.
That's very cool.
So you guys both write standalone books as opposed to series. So have you been tempted to revisit any of the characters from any of your books in something else?
I got asked about The Other Typist a lot if there was going to be a sequel. And since now it's went through a film option, now a TV option, and they're developing it with Hulu and Fox Searchlight and Keira Knightley. I don't know. I think it's possible they're looking to make the story carry on past the point of the book. Mm-hmm. So it's not necessarily that I'm writing a sequel, but someone else might tell the story on.
What has that experience been like for you?
I really knew nothing about how books get optioned or what happens, but it's been interesting. We went through the time where they wanted to do it as a feature film, and I got to take a look at some drafts of scripts and things. But now I guess TV's just been so interesting to people and appealing to the studios that are now trying to get into it. So like, for instance, when it first got optioned, Fox Searchlight didn't have a TV arm. They were just a feature film only deal, which they did very well. But now they really want to do television. And so they're greenlighting television projects. And what I love is now television has become this more capsulized narrative, so that you might just expect only a season or two, but it would be a really well crafted, tightened, honed season or two. And I found that appealing. So I don't know, we'll see what happens, but I've been learning as I go and learning about what also just like what the screenwriters go through when they do their drafts and rewrites, and that's been a fascinating thing to read and learn about. It's interesting because every version of storytelling I think appeals to people like us, right? And so it's just another medium, and so to me it's just exciting. Like another medium in which you can tell stories is always welcome.
So Fiona, what made you decide to do, and have you thought about doing any sequels? And then second part of that, have you had any like TV film bites?
Yeah, there's been some interest, especially with the Dollhouse, which I think would make a really fun series. That could be interesting, and also some interest in making it into a Broadway play, which would be interesting. But these things, you never know what's coming down the pike. But yeah, I think that would be great. I don't. People have asked would I write a sequel to a couple of the books, but no, I kind of like the fact that they ended where they did. And to have to bring some of these characters back to life, it would be interesting. But I feel like having already written in 2 time periods for each book, to carry on might make them lose their power.
And so Fiona, have you ever thought about, since they all take place in New York, and yes, they're all different time periods, have you ever thought about kind of making them shared worlds, sort of like the way Beatrice Williams does, where there's like this character pops up here and there?
Oh, I love that. She's amazing, the way she can pull books together. Yeah, I think that'd be fun. You know what I find? I have buildings popping up within each one, where they'll walk by or they'll make a comment about one of the buildings that's been in the other books. But yeah, I love that idea. I think that could be a lot of fun. Thanks for the idea.
I just imagine that like some like Fiona Davis short story where they all somehow end up like, despite time period, like all in the same room together.
Like all the same New Year's Eve party.
Yeah, oh my God, that would be amazing.
Oh, at the Plaza Hotel. I love this.
So Sherry asks for both of you guys, do you have favorite authors or who or what do you read in your spare time?
Oh, well, for me, my 2 favorite authors, like of all time, really are Margaret Atwood and Toni Morrison. I think those are who I go back to over and over when I'm feeling like I miss just hearing a good voice, that I'm turning the pages to hear the voice. But like, gosh, I don't know. There's so much good stuff. Like right now, because I was interested in the creepy haunted house sort of thing, I just finished Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno Garcia, and that was really, it was super dark and almost like I could picture this very grotesque horror movie in it, but it was really well written. I loved her. We love our friend Amy Popel, not just because she's a really nice person, but she's a really, really great humor writer, and the freshness of her characters and their quirks and things is always something that I love to dive into. Gosh, I'm trying to think of, there's just so many authors that's a really hard question to answer. I think my 2 go-tos have always been Atwood and Morrison, though, that I always like go back to find like what it is that made me love reading and made me love writing in the first place.
Yeah, I love Geraldine Brooks, definitely. And recently I've read some books that I have just fallen in love with. The Exiles by Christina Baker Klein, which is coming out later this month, is just an amazing historical fiction book. And I really loved Hamnet by Maggie O'Farrell, which is about Shakespeare's family, kind of from their point of view of what life was like. I really loved that book as well. And then there's a book coming out soon by a debut author named Asha Lemmy, Lemmie, called 50 Words for Rain. And it takes place in post-World War II Japan from the point of view of a young girl who's the daughter of a Japanese aristocrat and a Black GI. Oh, wow. And it's about her really fighting her way through in the world. Yeah. And it's like just unusual and something that I've never read before and was fascinating.
So Sally asks, this is for both of you. So Suzanne stays mostly in one time period while Fiona has 2 time periods. How did both of y'all fall into those methods?
Hmm. I don't know. I guess I am not, I would love to actually bring that together the way Fiona does. I think that's a really great technique, and the way it's so rewarding. The ends of her stories always really are very satisfying. And I don't mind jumping around in time. I know in Eagle and Crane I had a timeline where I had to go like after this big accident happened and all the points leading up to it. And that it was just a lot of work to keep straight while you're writing, because you had to make sure that the mystery was being revealed, the right piece at the right time. And but I've never jumped from 1993 to 1913 or anything like that. But that would I wouldn't be against it. I find that actually if the narrative is strong enough, then I find that's just enriching,
Yeah, I don't recommend it. It's really hard. I think I only did it because those are the books that I loved, and it was my first novel. So what did I know? Hey, I'll have 2 time periods. If I had known how hard it is, I would have smacked myself around and said, don't do it. I mean, I'm glad I do, and it definitely, fires up my brain cells. But it's ridiculously hard. And
you basically have to write 2 books for the price of 1, right? It's but you do it so well, it's worth it, right?
So Anissa asked, well, I'm going to ask this for both of you guys. So if you could co-author a book with anyone, who would you co-author with, and what do you think you would write about?
Wow.
Ooh. That is tricky. Co-authoring is very strange. I'm actually in a writing group where we were trying to do something together for fun, and it's been rewarding, but it's the first time really that I've been in a situation where I'm not like the king of my little world doing what I want when I want. So so far it's been good. I was surprised. I really didn't think that I would be okay with that. Is there something liberating about knowing that you're making all these choices? You don't have to argue to justify them, and then if you're wrong, you go back and you edit them, but it's on you, whatever. I don't know. But yeah, I don't know. The answer to that question is that would be a very special person if I were to co-author a book with someone. And what would I want it to be about? Maybe something I could learn more about. So maybe I would love to co-author something with someone who had a lot of technical expertise that I don't have, and they could really help me. And I would just love to maybe make the prose do service to that. You know what I mean? I don't know. That sounds like ghostwriting, actually, though, doesn't it? No idea.
I love it. Yeah, I'm lucky in that I was doing an author talk in Minneapolis a year or 2 years ago, and with an author named MJ Rose, who's a New York Times bestseller, incredible author, historical fiction. And on the plane ride home, we came up with the idea of doing an anthology of short stories around a suffragette parade in New York City in 1915. And we asked a number of authors if they'd write short stories for us. And they did. So we have Christina Baker Klein, Kristen Hanna does the introduction. So many incredible, I'm actually blanking because there's so many, Paula McLean, Allison Richmond.
Yeah.
And we have about a dozen authors, and we kind of, each one wrote from a point of view of a character around the same day of this big suffragette parade in New York City. And it comes out in October. So for me, that was so much fun because it's not co-writing, but it's kind of organizing and writing a short story and making sure everything's cohesive. So that's coming out in October, and I can't wait.
Very cool.
It sounds like it almost has Mrs. Dalloway vibes with the same day of the parade and the
yes.
I love it.
So Christine asks, do either of you have any input into your book covers?
Usually, well, I guess with the Other Typist, I had an editor who asked me a lot of what sort of things I imagined, and I kind of gave off these very abstract things of a fractured face, and actually they came out with a cover that was a really good version of kind of what I was picturing, and I was like, wow. And that was the end of the story. The other times I've had covers, they've shown me things, and I've not really known if that was the right one. And I've had like to ask, you call your mom, can you look at the whatever you call your like best friend from college or whatever. But yeah, I don't know that authors can't really take credit for book covers, I don't think, because there are people who make art that really do all that. And when someone compliments me on the cover, I'm kind of like, thank you, but I feel like what I really need to do is pass that compliment along, because I have no say in that, really.
Yeah. I love the cover for Lions. We loved it right off the bat. I thought they nailed it, and I love the woman in the corner reading. The team at Dutton have been incredible at putting together some really beautiful covers that need to illuminate both the book and the story, but without being too obvious. Mm-hmm. And I feel like they've nailed it every time.
Yeah, when I discovered the Dollhouse, like Suzanne, I got to read it before it came out, and I was just scrolling through we had this program called Edelweiss. It's where we can get access to advanced reader copies digitally. And I was just scrolling through and I saw the Dollhouse cover and I was like, what is this? And as soon as I was like, I'm in. And yeah, they do a really great job with the covers. So let's see, we have lots of questions about what are you guys working on next?
Go for it, Suzanne.
Oh, well, actually, I don't know. I am working on something new, but it's too early to talk about for me. So but I'm always, it's almost like the way I read. I start a few books at one time and then I just see which one I'm really, really dying to get back to. So that's how I write. I usually start a few different things, and then the one that really just sort of like grabs my head and says, all right, you're doing this now. And then I go with that one. But yeah, too early to talk about.
That's amazing to do it that way. For me, I'm already working on a book set at the Frick collection.
Oh, I love the Frick. That's a great building. I used to go there just to sit in the courtyard and do nothing else.
Oh, so glad. It's not as well known as some of my other books, so it's wonderful to get your reaction. It's just a gem of a building on Fifth Avenue that was owned by Henry Clay Frick and his family, and then later became an art museum. So it's kind of in the residence and the art museum world. And yeah, we'll see where it goes.
That's exciting.
That's exciting. Yeah. You got 2 fans already.
I love museums that like used to be people's houses.
Homes, yes, me too. I love that. And just trying to imagine what it was like to live there. And the Frick I love because I also remember going there one day where it was snowing and walking into that like dining room area and seeing like all the snow falling on Central Park and being like, yes, I'm in my dining room watching the snowfall. Come have a seat with me. The Frick's got a magical atmosphere of wealth, really.
And what's so wonderful about it is, since it's not open, they have an amazing online experience where you can almost as if you're walking through the building. So I can still go and research virtually.
Is anyone going to steal the Whistler paintings?
No, not in my book.
Actually, when I was reading Lines of Fifth Avenue and the whole book theft thing really put me in mind of the time that Mona Lisa got stolen in 1911. It was missing until 1913. And I kept thinking of that. So I just took it off the wall and walked out.
Amazing.
So Fiona, I wanted to ask you, one of the things I thought was really, really smart was the way that you were talking about when the books get stolen and they go to, in the 1993 timeline, they go to bookstores to figure out what bookstores might have potentially. I thought you did such a great job of like not mentioning any specific bookstores that were like real ones.
No. And keep in mind, most of the rare books stores in New York are absolutely above board. But every so often you get someone who's embedded in the rare book world who is a huge thief. It happens all the time. So yeah.
Yeah,
they're an interesting world too, the rare book community. There was they have a what do you call it, a convention of sorts at the Battery on Park Avenue, and for some reason some friends of mine wanted to go one year and we went, and the rare book people, they all know each other and they're quite eccentric characters.
There's a documentary about them called The Booksellers, which I highly recommend. It's fantastic.
Yeah. That sounds cool. I mean, I thought of them when I was reading your book as well. It's a whole world. It's a great world,
Yeah. So since you guys have both done multiple time periods in your combined books, do either of y'all have a favorite time period that you've written in?
Still the 1920s, I think. I think there's just something about the 1920s. There's so much change. It's like a little blip of liberation before things got very conservative back again after World War II came, the 50s and all that. So like 20s, I feel like the glamour, the excess, the fact that so many things had to be done under the table with prohibition, the fashion. I don't know. There's something good. Literature was just having this really great boom. I think being drawn to modernist literature. I still love the 1920s. If I had to go like live in an era, I would probably want to go to the 1920s.
I love it. I agree about the fashions of the 1920s. Absolutely.
They're good.
I would say though the 1880s in New York City, just because the city was still developing. And so you could see that the Upper West Side was just goats and shanties, and Central Park had hardly any trees. You know, it would be just so interesting to walk around a city that I know so well and have it look so different. So I'd say 1880s.
So Latoya asks, how long does it take you guys from start to finish to write a book?
Okay, well that one, it depends. I know like with The Other Typist, very oddly, it because I was supposed to be writing a dissertation, that probably made me write faster because I was doing things I wasn't supposed to be doing. But literally it was 9 months to the day that I finished like the full draft of it. And I was like, well, that's a loaded number. But then like 3 Martini Lunch, there were 3 different narrators. That took longer. And then I changed editors in the middle. My editor left. I got a new editor. And I think like, gosh, that took like 2.5, 3 years. So you never want to assume, you know, because as soon as you write down that delivery date for your publisher, it's probably not going to be right. Like for me, I don't know. I think usually what you don't realize is you're thinking about a book for about a year before you actually write it, and then you write it for about a year. There's some ideas in your head that are usually swimming around your head for 6 months to a year before you even write a book. And if you count that time, then probably 2 years for, you know, a book like the kind that I write.
Yeah, I'm probably a year to a year and a half these days, with about 3 months of research and then 3 months of writing a first draft and then about 10 revisions over time. But yeah, I tend to write fast just because it's the only way I can remember everything. If I wait too long, I'll forget half the story.
It happens.
And Charlene mentions in the comments that she thinks that the two of you should write a book together. And then that way, Suzanne, you can get your past and your present and you'll have them both together. And then Fiona, you don't have to do both of them.
That's true.
There we go. All right.
Tag team that.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for chatting with us tonight. If you tuned in the middle of the chat, we've been talking with Suzanne Rindell about the Two Mrs Carlisles and Fiona Davis about the Lions of Fifth Avenue. If you missed the first half of the chat, once we're done, Facebook will archive it and you'll be able to watch the full thing from the start. We'll also be uploading it to YouTube in the next couple of days. So if anybody wants to share it with people who maybe aren't on Facebook, it'll be up there on our YouTube channel. I wanted to mention a couple of things. We are still closed to the public at the store, but we are doing curbside and we're doing mail orders. You can visit us at murderbooks.com and you can order either book. We've got signed book plates to go with them. If you're not sure what you're looking for, you can just give us a call. We're happy to recommend books over the phone and wave at you through the window as you come by. We stress every time the best way to support the bookstore and the authors is to buy copies of their new books. We understand that's not exactly easy for everybody right now with everything going on. We do have an online tip jar, so if you've been enjoying them but maybe you already bought the books and you're watching the chat now, that's a great way to contribute. But again, we definitely recommend buying the books. The entire Murder by the Books staff is fans of both authors. Like I was saying before, one of the great things about this is we get to pair people up and we get to have these really great conversations. But the bad thing is we don't actually get to do it in person and go have a drink with y'all afterwards and get to hang out and hug. So we definitely miss seeing our author friends and our customers in the store. So Fiona and Suzanne, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Hopefully next time you guys step out, we'll be able to actually do this in person and get the full experience.
Thank you so much for this opportunity. And thanks to everybody listening in and supporting your local indie. That's so important.
Yes, ditto. Thank you. And it was so lovely chatting with both of you today. So.
Right. And I'll call you, Suzanne, to work on the book.
Yeah, that's right. we've got a job ahead of us.
No, I think it's